The year is 1998, and you are just a few weeks into the second grade. It's Tuesday morning, and if you don't want to be late for school, you do need to leave by 8:15 at the drop dead latest, but right now it's 7:30, so you can sit and eat your cereal and watch whatever cartoon WB54 is airing during this specific time slot. And you don't know it right now. But in this exact moment, you are the precise person that directors and developers have spent tens of millions gambling on. You're a kid in America who thinks they're watching another weekday morning cartoon slot, but who is in fact watching an anime, and who's about to get swept up into what will one day become the biggest media franchise of all time. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally am no longer in second grade and in 1998, so for me, that all happened a while ago. My memories of the Pokemon anime are so clear. I remember this show being exciting and hilarious and emotional. But just because you remember something clearly doesn't mean you're remembering it accurately. The truth is, I literally haven't watched that show since I was that kid. And if I can pry the nostalgia goggles off long enough to watch it right now, I genuinely don't know how it will hold up. Was the only appeal of this series the novelty of watching anime for the first time? Does this extremely late 90s story have anything meaningful to say in 2024? And if I do rewatch this anime, am I contractually obligated as a YouTuber to make a tiered ranking list? The answer to that last one is yes. I don't know about everything else. I am a little worried I'm gonna end up accidentally curb stomping a precious childhood memory, but I actually think I have to watch this anime right now. You see, I'm working on a cosplay that is from the beginning-most Gen 1 era of this franchise. I usually cosplay original designs, and the idea I had a while ago was what if Lavender Town had a witch? Lavender Town is a location in the game and early anime. It's a tiny haunted little town where there's a Pokemon cemetery and ghost Pokemon are found. And the way it's executed in the game is very much not like teehee Casper kid-friendly vibes. It is a genuinely unsettling and uncanny place. This crafting project is way bigger than a single video, so for this video we are just going to be focused on making a full-length 1890s-ish skirt. And while I'm getting started making a mock-up for that, it's time to take the plunge and start watching this anime. I'll be watching the 80-ish episodes of Season 1, the Indigo League series, and I've already got a lot to say about it, but first let's figure out this pattern real quick. By the end of this journey, I will have finished crafting this lavender pokeball skirt and come to a definitive reckoning with this anime one way or another. That is my objective, so let's absolutely blast off at the speed of light. I decided to go with a 7 gore skirt. I've got 3 in the front and then 4 in the back. The ratio of fullness in the front and the back is about 2:1, so like a third of the skirt is the entire front and 2/3 in the back. The mock-up is looking pretty solid, but one thing I do want this skirt to have is a ruffle at the bottom. So I marked on my mock-up a spot about 14 inches up, and I'm just gonna chop the pattern off there. When I went shopping for this fabric back in November, I found the shirtwaist fabric first, so that was locked in. And I was trying to find a coordinating, slightly darker and less saturated purple fabric that still had those homespun vibes. Whenever I sketch, I leave my fabrics very up in the air because I know that the New York City Garment District will provide for me. This was like a multiple day hunt to find the perfect fabric. We were exploring strange new worlds. We were fucking boldly going. I was really at the end of my rope. My backpack was full of swatches that were slightly too bright or just too lightweight to hold the structure when I found it. This massive bolt at Chic Fabric. I'm guessing it's a cotton blend based off of price point, and this fabric is woven with light lavender fabric on the warp and black fabric on the weft. So because these two fibers are so high contrast on their own, it provides a lot of visual interest in the fabric itself, and it means the fabric looks completely different in different circumstances and different lighting. Yesterday was my big fabric cutting day. I know these ruffles are gonna add a lot of weight, so I'm also cutting some muslin to flatline and just give a little bit more structure to this part of the skirt. When I say flatlining, I mean that I've cut fabric pieces in lightweight muslin, and I'm going to hand baste those against the fashion fabric and then treat it like a single piece of fabric. And listen, I am not hand basting these fabric panels on principle. I'm not doing this to have the moral high ground of historical accuracy. Every time I've ever tried to machine baste large fabric panels, it's always a mess. It always ends up really warped and really bubbly. And yeah, this part does definitely take a few days, but I'm breaking it up here and there with getting started on the waistband. It's nice to swap back and forth between the bigger fabric pieces and something way more manageable. In my experience, waistbands pretty much always need some level of reinforcement with muslin, so I'm doing that here. And our next step should be stitching the side seams and starting to pop those bad boys into the waistband. However, a plot twist has entered the chat. I can feel a shoulder angel right now, and that shoulder angel is winning. The angel is telling me, Lizard, if you don't add fucking pockets right now, you're gonna regret it for the rest of this build. But we'll resolve the pockets cliffhanger in a moment. I've gotta tell you about these first few episodes. The very first episode of Pokemon has a dizzying amount of exposition that it needs to expose. In the game, Professor Oak can just tell you directly what the Pokemon even are, and you can jump right into the action, but an anime needs a protagonist. So the first episode introduces us to Ash Ketchum, and because he's a protagonist, he oversleeps and misses his chance at a starter Pokemon and ends up with a Pikachu who is not having it. This episode covers so much ground. We meet Gary, our rival, we meet Misty, who will end up traveling with us. We get our first brush with Peril, TM, which will be a foundational part of the show. But to me, the most exciting thing this episode establishes is in the moment when Ash and Pikachu are waking up after their moment of mutual death defiance. They look up and see an enormous flying Pokemon, and Ash's Pokedex has no information on it. To me, this is so key because right away the boundaries of this world are shown to be like a tantalizingly undefined horizon. There's things we don't know about Pokemon, and this show is going to raise questions about them without rushing to answer that in next week's episode. This combination of the complex rules of the game strategy and the intentional nebulousness of the anime is absolutely key to why Pokemon was so instantly captivating to kids and why I am definitely ranking this episode an A. Boop boop boop, there you go, you're an A. We don't meet Team Rocket, our recurring antagonists, until the second episode, and I gotta say their camp vibes are really low this early on. Jesse and James and their talking Meowth are trying to steal some Pokemon, and they end up getting their asses handed to them by some Pikachu, which is why they spend basically the rest of their lives trying to steal Pikachu. I gotta rank this episode a little bit lower for some flimsy plot stuff and the Officer Jenny propaganda. This is a B for me. One of the cool things I'm noticing in these first few episodes is realizing just how much of the near future technology in this show is actually part of our everyday lives now. Like having a video phone call with your mom on the computer was part of the fantasy in 1998. Having a portable rectangle that contained encyclopedia information that was instantly accessible was part of the fantasy. But episode 3 doesn't have that much technology. We're out in the forest. Ash catches a sweet little bug Pokemon named Caterpie. And what I didn't know as a child watching this in 1998 is that the man who created Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri, was obsessed with bugs as a child. He grew up outside of Tokyo in the 70s, and he spent his summer days just catching bugs and coming up with strategies to collect cooler and weirder ones and writing down his discoveries in a notepad. As time went on though, those forests and fields where he would do that got paved over and turned into like real estate developments. So when I see Ash going into the forest and discovering new little critters to collect and learn about, I'm seeing a scene straight out of Satoshi Tajiri's childhood. And perhaps more crucially, it's an experience that got lost in the push of urbanization. And that's just some cool fun facts to distract you from the fact that I am ranking this episode as a C, because it was just kind of slow. And we're not done with bugs yet, because the next episode is also bugs, but this time it's a little samurai boy. They really threw the localization team into the deep end here, huh? Which actually brings up a really important point. The Pokemon anime was never supposed to be localized. Neither was the game. The first several years of the development of the Pokemon universe is a story about Japanese creators creating for a Japanese audience. No one thought Pokemon would work outside of its original cultural context, and no one could have predicted the way that new millennia globalization was going to change literally everything. Localized or not though, this specific episode is definitely a D. Even with our first final evolution introducing Butterfree, the confrontation just doesn't make sense and the battle itself was a total flop. But after some slow starters, this show is finally ready to show us what it can do in Pewter City. This is the episode where the show stops being afraid to just do good fucking anime. We get some exposition at the top about the gym system and the Pokemon League championships, which will be our main plot for this season. Ash needs to get his 8 badges and win the league contest. And this showdown at Ash's very first gym is just kind of a masterclass in really great anime storytelling. This storytelling is done through confrontations, through flashbacks, through Pokemon battles themselves, through extended sequences about the principles of electromagnetism that tie back to our real world. It's the kind of episode that leaves you genuinely astonished how they fit all that in 20 minutes. And that gives you a feeling there are somehow even cooler things waiting on the horizon with Brock joining our adventuring party. This is an absolute S rank episode, and I'm feeling so motivated to work on this cosplay now. And we're only 5 episodes in. How long have I been recording for? Oh dear. That was 5 episodes and I've got 75 left. I might need to reconnoiter some stuff. Okay, I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna send you back to the pockets predicament. Ooh, I'm gonna figure this out. I was so ready to be like, oh, I'll add a little pouch on the waistband. I will figure it out later. But the more I work with this, the more I'm like, this is a really full skirt. What's the point of making an incredibly full skirt if not to use that fullness to hide stuff in your pockets? So I'm gonna grab my French curve and make some pairs. Since I'm already using muslin to flatline the skirt, I'm using muslin for the pockets as well. I know I wanna sew on some patches of the fashion fabric. This way, whenever I actually use the pocket, it's not gonna look like a disruptively different shade of fabric than the rest of the skirt. Longtime friend of the channel, Spray and Bond, helps with getting these patches on. And honestly, I'm just trying to move fast on this. Like, fuck it. Zigzag stitch the raw edge, zigzag stitch down the patch edges. No one is gonna see these. And I do manage to chuck together these oven mitts in like a few hours. I'm gonna have them attached to the waistband with some grosgrain ribbon way later on in the process, so I'm not worrying about that right now. So all right, the Shoulder Angel 1, we've actually got our precious little pairs done. Our sacks of holding. I really wanna actually sew the gores together today, but I've gotta get these darts in first. A dart is just a sewing term for whenever you fold a piece of fabric and stitch a triangle into it. Now these are usually used to make something fit a little bit closer, so I'm doing a quick running stitch along the height of the triangle. This way when I machine stitch the sides of the triangle, nothing should be too funky. I'm also being very well behaved and tying off my darts by hand instead of back tacking them. I always forget this is something you're supposed to do, but Briar in my Discord mentioned it and I was like, oh right, I should do that. So I'm doing that, thank you Briar. So after all this work preparing the pattern pieces and making sure the darts are all sewn in, it is so fucking satisfying to just smack them together and stitch along the sides. It's so many big, long, beautiful seams, and I honestly think this skirt is gonna go so hard. But will it be done in time for Katsucon? It's the question of the hour, y'all. We'll find out together. Y'all, I'm feeling the Katsu crunch today. We've got a lot to do, comrades. But let's talk about what we did get done because today was a productive one. Once I got all of these skirt panels together, I took out the basting thread and I finished the edges with a zigzag stitch because I've just got to get this part done. I also absolutely slapped in an invisible zipper. So I popped this on so I could revel in the vibes of how absolutely enormo this skirt pattern is. Usually for a waistband this involved, I will work in segments. Like I'm probably going to stitch down the front 3 gores, the ones that don't need to be gathered first, and then I will deal with whatever's happening with the back 4. I usually like to gather into waistbands, but I just have a feeling that pleats are gonna be the move for this one. I haven't done pleats in a long time, so this might be a mistake. Did I go too far on the fullness for this back part? Maybe. I think on either side it's like 20-ish inches into a part of the waistband that's like 5. My first attempt to stitch this down ended in unmitigated disaster. So I went back later and I did 2 rows of hand basting on either side of where the seam will be, and I'm hoping that'll keep things way more contained. And once that part is stitched down and looking pretty solid, I can start to think about, you know, folding and flipping the waistband. Back when I made the petticoat, which also had a lot of fullness condensed into a very small amount of waistband, I actually hand basted it instead of using pins, and it turned out so good. And that's literally not even gonna be visible. So now I'm kind of like, well, obviously I should do that for the waistband. So I go in, I do my hand basting, and then I top stitch everything down, and the end result is fine. I mean, it's not bad. I might be getting burnt out on hand basting things because I'm not attaining that same spiritual release from seeing this stuff come together. It's done, and that's what matters, I guess. The literal last thing I gotta do for this top part of the skirt is pop on a hook and eye. I go in my stash, I grab a little guy in gunmetal, and our top 2/3 of the skirt is functional. I wish I could say I'm feeling triumphant and excited right now, but I don't know. We'll see if that feeling of accomplishment is waiting for us on the other side, once we get this ruffle on. So as we get back to our watch through, I have to be honest that I am feeling about 0% confident in my ability to do this without accidentally making an 8-hour video. Also, I don't even think they'll be fun to watch because I looked ahead at some of the episode titles and some of my all-time favorites are towards the beginning, so that would make this whole thing really anticlimactic. Maybe this was really overambitious. Maybe I should just do a normal fucking sewing video for once. I mean, unless I like binge all 80 episodes and figure out how I'm going to do this, I know how I'm going to do this. The truth has been revealed to me, and I'm swerving us into a better game plan. I'm not taking us on a start-to-finish journey through my very first anime. I'm taking us on a journey all the way up the ranks. We are going to face this series' lowest lows and work our way up to its highest highs.
Restarting at the basement. My criteria for E-rank episodes is that they can't just be bad, they have to be genuinely offensive. Like, they have to enrage me. Like The Path to the Pokemon League, which is like trying to do something interesting about how it's valid to train your Pokemon in different ways, but the end result is just, wow, we can agree to disagree on animal abuse. I remembered the Punch a Pokemon being like a fun boxing movie pastiche, and instead it ended up being an episode where nothing happens. Where are the jokes? This next one is maybe my most controversial take of this whole venture, but freedom of speech, freedom of speech.
That's my opinion!
I genuinely think that Pikachu's goodbye is genuinely hollow tear bait. The idea that Pikachu, who is fully sentient on par with a person, would ever go live with a herd of wild Pikachu without his best friend makes no good goddamn sense. I knew even as a child, the idea that they'd write out the show's main character, and frankly also the mascot that fueled aisles and aisles of merch, was completely laughable. These stakes are non-existent. The emotional ballad sequence was viscerally embarrassing to watch.
I can see the day we met.
And to me, worst of all, this bizarre plot undercuts the emotional impact of a different iconic goodbye episode that we'll talk more about soon. Anyway, the Executor episode and the Chansey episode are bizarre, creepy nonsense. The Case of the Canine Caper is propaganda. And the Evolution Solution made me want to strangle my screen. This episode is clickbait. It's like a fucking YouTuber with a title and a thumbnail that looks interesting. It's how does Slowbro evolve with a shelter? And the answer is actually just some dude with an annoying voice talking at you for 20 minutes and saying absolutely nothing. Our D-rank episodes aren't much better. We've got an episode whose grand finale is just a Dragonite walking away, and an episode where the entire plot is Monkey Steal Hat. There's one where Hypno accidentally kidnaps children, which just seems like a strange thing to intentionally associate with your children's TV show. Then there's Tarzan Family Needs Therapy. I can't believe they made Bird Won't Stop Stealing Things boring. The Great Value version of our regularly scheduled villains. A horrible clown becomes a live-in maid/son. There's a man with no personality except his muscles. There's whatever fillery nonsense is going on with this guy, and finally a Pokemon League finale arc episode that I found offensively insufficient to wrap up the series. More on that one later. Pokemon at its absolute worst is more than just a bad anime, because it's also a 20-minute commercial. Many of these genuinely bad episodes represent attempts to tie in elements of the game, like Krabby getting sent to Bill's PC and Bruno from the Elite Four. As a sidebar, some of you might have noticed similarities between a certain other member of the Elite Four and this cosplay design, and you are right on the money. The ghostly vibes have been correctly clocked. This anime was ultimately created as a wildly expensive means to promote the game. This was a major gamble for the studios, and it's a gamble that would not have paid off if all of the episodes were this profoundly unfortunate. The shittiness of these episodes to me is not just about them being boring or cringy, it's also about the stink of marketing and capitalism that you get off of them that makes me start to feel cynical about the whole thing. But I know this is just the bottom rung and we're about to start climbing our way up, after we cover some more ground on the skirt.
You know, some might say our skirt is 2/3 full. Others might call it 1/3 empty. But today, we're fixing that. I don't know, I didn't think through this transition. We're getting started on the ruffle today. Literally 1 million years ago when we were working on the mock-up, we hacked off about 14 inches. That's what we're re-adding today, or starting to at least. I just doubled the width of that bottom of the 2/3 part, and that's gonna be a ruffle. I cut one of these ruffles by using the pull a thread and then cut on the empty space so you get a nice clean grain line, and then I cut the other one by just making a snip and tearing. Yes, comrades, we're actually making 2 ruffles. We're making a double tiered ruffle. One of these tiers you probably recognize as the linen that we used for the shirtwaist. That is gonna be the ruffle on top. I love the way historical ensembles will bring back fabric in one part to use on another part. I think it makes the designs look really cohesive, and I'm hoping to do that here. The bottommost ruffle, however, is a new challenger. I'm going to be using this brushed white cotton. For both of these cylinders, I'm going with flat filled seams along the side seams, and to hem the periwinkle linen, I'm just folding it over twice and stitching it down. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Plus the fabric is so pretty, I don't want to take away from its natural drape. But I think the brushed white cotton is going to need a little more engineering, so I did end up putting horsehair in the second fold of the hem. Horsehair is a woven nylon trim that gives a little like springy quality to parts of a garment. Also, I'm a weak man and I do pick up a little lace trim for the bottom of it. I've got a lot of rounded triangle motifs in the design so far as a nod to the kind of like rounded spikes of Gengar and Haunter, and I was absolutely delighted to find this trim. Daytona trim is always my go-to for laces, and they didn't let me down. down. I am so happy to say that both of these ruffle cylinders are done because we almost had a math catastrophe. I did not buy enough fabric for my original plan, so this time I only had half as much as I needed. Luckily, I had overbought on both the periwinkle linen and the brushed cotton, so I was able to scrounge up and make it so my ruffle will be at 1.5 widths fullness instead of 2, and I think it'll still look okay in the finished garment. And I will say, if you want to do a deep dive into ruffle density, I highly recommend checking out the Shapes of Fabric. Shapes of Fabric is one of the best sewing resources out there. She has examples of 1.5 times full ruffles and like 2 times and 3 times, so I knew my 1 2/3 ruffle would look somewhere in between those two, and I was able to make it happen. So here they are, my buds. Here are our 2 enormous fabric cylinders. Bazinga. I feel like I'm running out of stuff to say. Honestly, it is February 2nd, and the only thing on my mind right now is how close Katsucon is and how very close to the wire I'm getting. So I'm gonna keep going. I am gonna stack these cylinders on top of each other, and then I'm gonna make sure that I get them gathered down so they go into.
Absolutely none of that happened. I did not finish the skirt in time for the Katsucon 2023 deadline, and in fact, the next time you see me crafting will be after a big ol' time skip. But I think that means it's a perfect time to get back to our rewatch and take a look at anime episodes that are above nightmarish and abysmal, but still leave a lot to be desired. Some of these have a pretty solid message, like private schools are weird, but then they somehow mess it up along the way. I mean, honestly, Battle Aboard the St. Anne is a really good episode that I like a lot. It's the first part of a 3-parter that involves some really tender development between Ash and his Butterfree and a battle and a Pokemon convention and a shipwreck. It ends on probably the first cliffhanger I ever experienced in media. I'll never forget having to make it through that school day not knowing how our heroes in Team Rocket got out of the capsized boat. But I had to bump it all the way down here because the Magikarp salesman who scammed James has a cartoonish Mexican accent in the dub. 4Kids really said, our localization just isn't racist enough. And this localization is already really clunky, famously turning visibly Japanese food like onigiri into jelly donuts, and this level of pandering really drags down the show. It betrays a real lack of trust in the audience, or more accurately, the audience's parents. I did skip most of the banned episodes that never got a dub or only aired once, but I was astonished to find that this episode with James's beautiful bazonkers, the bazonkers are kind of the only good part. I low-key agree with them for nixing this from the lineup. Some other episodes have incredibly memorable parts, but kind of end up on the wrong side of the message. Like how this episode focuses more on Horsey being a perfect little victim when the ocean gets polluted instead of the Tentacool who goes on a mean kaiju rampage. Or the way this one gives us iconic runway looks but ends up kind of saying that it's shallow to want to express yourself through the way you present. This is also where we start to get into episodes that are straight up repeats. Why did we make a Gloom episode twice? Or multiple Jigglypuff puts everyone to sleep episodes? The majority of these C ranks aren't actively bad, they're just also not very good. Stuff like the Fuchsia City Gym is ninjas. Cinnabar Island Gym is riddles. Ash carries a torch. There's a biker gang episode that's a fun game tie-in but has a really weak resolution. There's an episode with an arranged marriage plot for James that should be really fun but is just kind of Same with the plot where our Meowth gets mistaken for a hero and we get to see Team Rocket exploring the place between villainy and righteousness, but there's too much preschool nonsense going on for it to be really enjoyable. We ask ourselves questions like, who gets to keep Togepi? And the answer is Misty. I just saved you 20 minutes. And I also included one more League finale arc for its frustratingly transparent characterization of a boy named Richie. He's like an Ash clone with 18% character development to be a better person, but a less compelling character. One thing I do find really interesting as we wrap up this tier and move on to the next is the way that this show handles environmentalism. As a kid in the late 90s, the issue of the planet was so pervasive, I don't think I realized how loud the messaging was until the zeitgeist had passed. The show says that all Pokemon are morally neutral, but you can't help but notice the way that Grimer and Muck function as like sentient pollution in episodes like Sparks Fly for Magnemite, and that Team Rocket's Pokemon Arbok and Coughing spit poison and sludge. I think these Pokemon reflect the somewhat limited way we conceptualized saving the planet 25 years ago, as a mess to be cleaned up. There's more I want to say about this, but let's wrap up that massive crafting time skip and see where we're at in the present tense. It is today, November 9th. The last time I worked on this project was in May. I am not proud of these sentences that I'm saying to you right now, but they are the truth. So when we last spoke, we had the skirt kind of sorted in 2 parts. There was the top 2/3 and then there was the bottom ruffle that existed in like 2 giant cylinders. But before we bring those together, I have to tell you about the trim that I made in the spring, because so far, the costume that we've been working on has been kind of like a lot of very purpley historical looking garments, but there hasn't been a lot of Pokemon stuff in there, and we need to bring the Pokemon energy. So jump in the time machine, my pals, and let me take you on a journey to the semicircle hell that I found myself in last spring. I deeply hate drafting circles, and I won't do it. So to get started, I just grabbed a series of kitchen utensils. The trim is going to be 2 half circles layered on top of each other for the pokeball and the little button in the center. The bigger one that represents the body of the pokeball is going to be the same fabric as our skirt, and then the smaller one is going to be the same fabric as the prairie points for our hat. For each of these, you gotta remember I had to clip the curves and press them and make sure that they were like really holding their shape. I'm backing each one of these with just a black polyshantung that I've got lying around. So once all these Pokeballs were done, it was of course time to attach them to the skirt, and I did not do that. I did not fucking do that. I put them in a drawer and they sat there for months and months. Instead, I did like a whole bunch of other stuff, like hand sewing in the pockets, which yeah, did eventually need to get done, but it was not the most pressing thing. And then I hand sewed along the edge of the chopped off skirt so the fabrics wouldn't shift around when I did eventually attach the ruffle. But then instead of attaching the ruffle, I just let it sit there for a few months. This is not even all of them. It's literally just like a few dozen of these. My machine has some fun embroidery stitches, so I used one of those to make this like center line here, and I'm looking at it now and I'm kind of like, do I want to add more embroidery here? I don't know, it looks a little thin in the camera. There's just so many of them. My update for you today is that I was not a strong enough man to resist the you should hand sew these demons. Like, look at this, from 20 feet away, this is not giving 1890s gym leader. We need hand embroidery. This is also inspired by something that is gonna be in a later video, but I'll show you real quick. Where did you go? Hello? Aha, there it is. This is a little embroidery sampler that I did on a scrap of fabric. Astonishingly, I already owned all of these different colors of fucking purple. I will talk so much more about this in an upcoming video, but for now, all you need to know is I'm thinking embroidery thoughts. So embroidery thoughts is what I enacted on these Pokeballs. So on one of my crafting streams for my patrons, I messed around with different stitches, and listen, it took some practice, but I think these straight lines are looking extremely fucking tasty. Like, even from how far away the camera is, just compare contrast these two. Which one looks like a Pokeball? I think we know which one. I think I'm about halfway through the scallops. I counted 12 finished ones and 11 unfinished ones, and also this one. Let's get back into it. In my immutable and absolute judgment, there are 25 B rank Pokemon episodes. 25 that I genuinely really enjoyed watching. They're not like the kind of episodes I die on a hill for, but they're genuinely really solid, and I would consider some of them to be classics. Some of them help establish the world, like when we meet Bulbasaur in his garden. And sidebar, I love Girly Pop's outfit. I would wear this. Or the legendary pranksters of the Squirtle Squad. Foundational baddie icons. The anime production team really wanted to make sure that kids wouldn't play favorites with the 3 starters, so they each got an episode. We learn a little bit more about Misty being the youngest sister and gym trainer at the Cerulean City Water Gym. Actually, we get 2 episodes about her sisters, and I do think the second one is way better. They do like a little synchronized swimming mermaid cross-dressing show. It's fun. There are also 2 Clefairy episodes, and you can always sign me up for a spacey plot. I loved thinking about Pokemon being connected to the moon and aliens. And I did also put the 2 ancient Pokemon fossil episodes in here because it's dinosaurs and ancient artifacts. What more could you want from a 90s kids show? The second one also has giant kaiju combat. I'm a simple man. Electric Shock Showdown is the series' first episode about how it's okay to not evolve, alongside the Eevee episode later on. We watch Pikachu learn that he can just like being Pikachu without rushing to turn into Raichu. I like that the discussion of this electric-type gym battle gets really technical, and I like that the resolution to the episode's main conflict isn't just the power of friendship. At this level, even fairly close recreations of the game are just pretty well executed. Like, I think the episode where they wake up Snorlax with a flute is fun, but maybe that's also because I really wanted to eat these vines when I was a little kid. I kind of still do.
Yeah.
I even liked the Pokemon Snap promo episode, and I didn't even play that game. What I really enjoy about these episodes that are good but not great is they give us that kind of gentle world building that you can only really get with an extremely long run of serialized media. Our heroes aren't sprinting from town to town. They're taking the time to stop and encourage a frightened little mushroom crustacean, or solve a turf war between two competing gyms, or do a little drag to get into the plant Pokemon gym, or almost die in a snowstorm, or have a drawn-out fight over a volcano. Very relatable recreational activities. This does mean the overall pacing of the season gets a little funky towards the end. There's kind of a whole section right before the Pokemon League arc where Ash is just vibing. He goes surfing, his Pokemon make a movie. To me, a lot of what I'm calling the League arc that wraps up the season is a B. I put 3 of the 7 episodes in this tier. In the video game, you battle the Elite Four to become a Pokemon Master and ultimately win, but the anime turns this into a trainer versus trainer style competition. The problem is, in case you didn't already know, the Pokemon anime does not end here. So in the course of that 7-ish episode arc, Ash does not win and does not become a champion. I ranked a bunch of those episodes much lower earlier because his loss really does feel shoehorned in and unsatisfying, something they needed to do for real-world reasons and not narrative ones, because the show was a smash by this point and obviously they weren't going to cancel it. But that said, a lot of the Pokemon battles themselves are among the best we get in the series. They're inventive and well-paced, and it's truly cool to see our heroes interacting with so many other trainers in this kind of Pokemon Olympic village that's like a microcosm of the whole Pokemon world. Which kind of brings me to what makes the setting of this anime so unique. That for all intents and purposes, the map we got at the beginning of this story was supposed to be the only map. Pokemon in 2024 has grown so broad that you can have whole games set in themed regions, places that are Spain-themed or United Kingdom-themed, but Kanto was supposed to encompass the full extent of the Pokemon world we'd see. The different themed areas are contained within it, not tangential to it, and the sense of scale this creates is truly unique to this generation, and a big part of why these League Championships feel so high stakes. I know that people like me that really deeply love Generation 1 of Pokemon can get a reputation for overhyping it sometimes, which I think is a completely fair point. I'm not trying to convince a skeptic that this era was peak perfect Pokemon because 1, it's not, and 2, that's a really boring opinion to have. I find it so much more interesting to think about how this anime got the secret sauce right and was able to capture the imagination of so many children around the world when so many other animes have failed. But speaking of things that are objectively peak and a little bit perfect, let's get back to that skirt because baby, Ash Ketchum can only dream of the momentum we're building right now. The moment that I finished my last embroidered pokéball, I realized that the journey wasn't over. The lines just still weren't really reading from farther away, so I decided to pop on some additional rows of the satin ribbon I also used in the shirtwaist. I think I've mentioned the shirtwaist a lot here because originally I was going to put out that video first, but after asking my patrons about it, I decided to rearrange the release order a little bit. If you love spoilers, my Patreon is the place to be. There is so much crafting on there of projects I just haven't finished editing yet. Once I got the lines on all 24 of the pokéballs, there was nothing left to do. There was no more embellishment I could possibly throw on here. All I had to do was stop being a coward and make a fucking miracle happen. So last night, something astonishing happened, and I actually sewed the pokéballs on the skirt. Getting them on the skirt itself was not the scary part. The scary part was like finalizing where this hem exactly sits, and yesterday we did it. And that's only half of the miracle blessing, because I made 24 of these pokéballs knowing that it wasn't exactly the right math. I figured I would have a little gap somewhere in the back and I would like space them out a little bit more, cover that space, whatever. But when I pinned all of these on last night, they fit perfectly. That math doesn't even math. That shouldn't have worked out that way. I'm convinced that it was the universe blessing me for finally being decisive and finally realizing that like it's a fucking skirt and it's not that deep and making it happen. I will try and remember to put this on and give you a little spin in it because it is extremely silly at this current length. I forget if I ever showed you the hand sewing along the hem here that I did to, you know, make sure that the fabric wasn't going to get all bunched up and bubbly, but like, I don't know, aren't you tired of hand basting? Don't you just want to go ape shit? So now we're in a place to actually look at the giant ruffles, which I will go grab. Step number 1 is just going to be giving these bad boys an enormous press because they have been sitting on the floor of my closet for many months. We'll just slap them on here. 2019 TikTok, let's fucking go. But before I do that, there's one step that I have added, because when I bought this fabric in the store, it looked like an off-white next to the really bleached whites, but the more I work with it, I'm like, it looks really bright in context with the rest of the cosplay. It's reading way too fresh and new. Look at this. Is this giving vintage? And if I were to paint this fabric, it would lose that really beautiful soft brushed texture it has. But there is hope for us yet. There is something in between a paint and a dye, and that is Jacquard Dynaflow, another frequent friend of the channel. The thing that I really love about Dynaflow, which is kind of like a paintable dye, is that you just set it by using your iron. I'm a New Yorker of a certain socioeconomic class. I obviously do not have in-unit washer dryer, and the idea of taking like fabric that might turn everything pink to the laundromat, nightmarish, ghoulish. I would never do it. I also used it on the hat for this cosplay in a black color. I don't want to use black for down here. I think that's going to look a little too desaturated. We want this to be like the little pop of warm tones and an otherwise very cool toned ensemble. But first I am going to run into the garment district today because I gotta pick up all of my twill tape for these little stripies here. Will we get there before the bagel shop closes? Time alone will tell. We did it, Joe. We made it to the bagel shop in time, and once I finished absolutely fucking up this breakfast, Sammy, I did go to Pacific Trimming and get all the twill tape I'm gonna need. And when I got home, I started painting the ruffle. And like, here's the thing, you guys. The painting part, super easy, kind of fun, you know, just making sure that I'm not painting over a wet line, making sure I'm getting the dye dispersed. But managing all this fabric was honestly such an ordeal. I ended up grabbing a bunch of my kitchen chairs and like draping the lengths of fabric over that. The funny thing is that this fabric looked so nasty, even though I logically knew it was paint. It looked like it was muddy and dirty and gross. So that meant it was time to bring together the periwinkle linen layer and the now painted cotton layer. I did a row of basting at the very top, and I also did a row of basting about an inch down from the raw edge of the fabric. This way, when I do the zigzag over cord to gather down the fabric, that zigzag stitch is going to be completely encased in basting. It is not going to move around at all. This was all going down around the holidays, and when I got back in town yesterday, I knew I was ready to let the demons get to me again. Basically, after a few days of working primarily with this white cotton fabric, I just realized that I was like really unhappy with the visible hem on it. So when you're unhappy with the workmanship in a piece, you kind of have three options. You can redo it, which I was not going to do here, you can cover it up, or you can distract from it. And I kind of went with a combination of the latter two. I am just doing a very long, very simple running stitch along the part where the horsehair stitch line is. All I'm doing is marking dots a centimeter apart and stitching along that, and it really does help kind of distract from the wobbliness. I just did the math, and the total length of this running stitch should be about 8 yards, just under 8 yards. If I'm able to be speedy on that, my next goal is going to be laying down the cord that I'm going to use for gathering. And I have a feeling that actually gathering down all of this and attaching it is going to be a full day of sewing in and of itself, not a starting at 3 p.m. day of sewing. So that will probably be the next time that I see you. Do you like this? Do you like this new mug? It's not a Christmas present. I was shopping in Home Goods for other Christmas presents, and it was $3.99. What a great outro. Time to get started hand sewing. I mentioned earlier that each of the 3 starter Pokemon got an episode, but we've only talked about 2 so far. That's because the bone-deep sadness and lasting impact of Charmander the Stray Pokemon is without a doubt an A-rank episode. This Charmander was abandoned by a really horrible man who can't even fucking say Charmander right.
Hey, Charmander.
The plot of this episode doesn't overly complicate itself, and the visual metaphor of the flame on Charmander's tail signifying whether or not he's going to survive is just good storytelling. This is where we first saw that the show was fully prepared to break your heart a little bit, that it wasn't all going to be silly bits and contrived cartoony danger. And actually, not all of the danger here is cartoony. I mentioned the sinking of the Saint Anne 3-parter earlier, and the second episode in that is just genuinely fucking exciting. It's just a series of great action set pieces of everyone escaping the sinking boat, like our heroes working together with Team Rocket to make it out alive. It ends on another cliffhanger with James accidentally unleashing the cosmic horror of Gyarados' Dragon Rage. These early 3-parters really set the standard for how good this show could be as a serialized narrative. Just a few episodes later, we get another banger 3-parter about the psychic gym trainer Sabrina in Saffron City, and part 1 is literally a whole ass Twilight Zone episode. It's legitimately the same story as Stopover in a Quiet Town. But bro, I was 7. I would not watch Stopover in a Quiet Town for many, many more years. The Pokemon anime got to be my first touchstone for a lot of tropes whose ubiquity I wouldn't realize until decades later. There is a reason why I'm basing my cosplay on the Lavender Town we see in the game, and not as much the Lavender Town we go to in the second part of the Sabrina 3-parter. I love this episode a lot. We get to see a really playful side of the original Ghost Pokemon trio, inviting Ash and Pikachu into their spooky, silly lives. Personally, I wish there were more of a contrast between something genuinely unsettling and the giggling and kicking my feet energy of the ghosties in here, but I also understand why they didn't want to get too intense for the anime. For me, that makes it an A and not an S. Also, the 3rd episode conclusion of this arc, where they all return to confront Sabrina and fill her life with laughter and love, was back down in our very crowded B section. The B and C sections are full of episodes that are about protecting the natural habitat of Pokemon, but to me the one that stood out was the Diglett one, because it frames the Pokemon as not just inhabitants of land, but stewards of it. They're gardening and terraforming the land. They are active caretakers of their ecosystem that's about to be destroyed, and I just think that's way more interesting than a simplified, reductive pollution is wrong message. I've also watched a lot of episodes where Ash's Pokemon will meet a herd of its own kind, and to me the standout of this genre is the Bulbasaur one, because the shot where Bulbasaur does Solar Beam is so fucking sick. Look at him go. I love that little dude. This shot alone made this an A rank for me. When the Pokemon anime is at its best, we're learning more about this cast of characters. Like in Princess vs. Princess, when Jessie and Misty have this fun girly pop rivalry. It riveted me as a child, even if I had no good goddamn context for this plot's Hinamatsuri basis. And their relationships also aren't stagnant. Like the episode pretty late in the season when Ash and his rival go back to Pallet Town, and they get to see how things have been back home and end up working together in a meaningful way. Our characters are being put in spicier and spicier predicaments, like facing off against the evil Team Rocket Kingpin Giovanni in the final gym battle. This episode is so intense and also gives us incredible tie-ins with the movie. If you're wondering if I'm going to talk about the movie, great news. I already did that. I'll put it in the cards and in the playlist. And to me, most importantly, this show uses our main characters and their regularly scheduled adventures to develop the world of Pokemon. Their escapades aren't just about them, it's about you, the viewer, and building a sandbox that you want to go play in. When there's a big race, you get to see how a ton of different Pokemon would act in that context, which plants the question, how would my favorite Pokemon win a marathon? What special tactics would they have to get across that finish line first? When there's a big academic testing plotline, you think about what would school be like if I were trying to be a Pokemon trainer instead of an elementary school student? When you play the video game, you have agency, you can make these decisions for yourself, but the visuals are fairly limited. Pokemon moves are often just various flavors of squiggling around. But when you combine the self-insertion of the game with the flexibility and compelling visuals of the anime, the real definitive canon of the world of Pokemon becomes the version that you have created in your imagination by combining all of this. And I truly think that is the thing that defines the influence of this show. Hey, did you know that it's skirt day? It's fucking skirt day, my dudes. I don't have anything else to say. Let's go sew this skirt. What more can I say about this skirt that hasn't already been said? I was definitely correct in my guess that gathering down the ruffle was going to be a full day of sewing, and wouldn't you know it, that day was January 3rd, 2024. I looked in my camera roll, the day that I made the mock-up for this skirt was January 13th, 2023. So that's just 10 days shy of the actual 1-year anniversary of starting this skirt. And here we are, buds! here we are, homies, look at that. It's a functional, wearable skirt. I did do some other stuff once I got the ruffle gathered down and attached, as you can see here. I spray and bonded on a line of twill tape, and yeah, I did also hand baste that on. In my earlier videos, I used to have like a clown cam come up whenever I would do stupid shit, and I think we should bring back the clown cam for this. For me, being like, I'm fucking done with hand sewing, and then all of the hand sewing I immediately did after I said that. But I don't regret it, you know, for something like twill tape, if I were to use pins, it would be really bunchy and wavy, and this trim looks so clean right now. I do really want to add some additional lines, or just a single line of a thinner twill tape above this to balance out the design a little bit and draw the eye a little bit higher. Twill tape is a woven matte kind of trim, and the satin ribbon that I used is a very glossy trim. This means that in some lighting, the blacks that I used on the pokeball looks like a lighter black than this one, and I kind of want to draw the eye up a little bit. But I'm gonna have to see if I have time for that, because we're about a month out from Katsucon and I've gotta switch gears onto some props. If you're watching this in the future, I'm sure Future Lizard has organized everything into a nice little playlist for you to binge. One of the things that I am definitely going to do on this skirt before it's completely done is add a little bit of weathering. She's looking way too pristine right now. Right now, in some lighting, the tonal difference between the top and bottom fabric just isn't quite enough. They blend together a little bit, and you don't really see these pokeballs that I worked so hard on. The really high contrast of this black definitely isn't helping out, and I know I want to add back in some contrast around here. I think I'm going to add some weathering underneath each of these scallops just to make sure that they really pop, that the eye is really drawn to them, like a little IRL drop shadow, which I guess is just a shadow. But not today, because I really do have to get started on some props. I will see you soon. The props are going to be coming back in a later video or 2 or 3, and it was absolutely the right call to prioritize getting this cosplay wearable for the convention, even if it wasn't 100% done. Missing that first Katsucon deadline last year, and also earlier in this video, really threw off my momentum as far as getting these videos out there, and it feels really great to finally be sharing some of this crafting here. It's now a few weeks after Katsucon where I debuted the 1.0 version, and I've already gone back and made some changes, including making an entire new corset. If you want to check out that video, the full playlist for this series is in the description. Coming back to the skirt, I did go back and add those extra stripes on top of the pokeball trim, which really heightens the 1890s energy for me. And that means today I'm going to take my jar of Dynaflow and actually do that weathering and painting. I sound like shit right now. My voice completely left me for low-key no reason last week. It's finally just now starting to come back, and I didn't want to delay this video another week just because I sound like this when I'm dying to tell you all about these Pokemon episodes that transcend everything else we've talked about so far. The singular episode I think of when I think about this whole show is Island of the Giant Pokémon, the third and final part in the Saint Anne 3-parter. It's not just that the pacing and the plot are really fun and the way it ends in this incredibly late 90s theme park twist. What really sets this one apart is how for the first time in the series, we see the Pokémon of Ash and Team Rocket drawn together by circumstance without their trainers. We get a look at the peaceful collectivist cohabitation they can have independently. There's this moment where they kind of face the tension of their trainers being enemies. And Team Rocket's Pokémon say that Pokemon can't intrinsically be good or evil if they're just following their trainer's orders. I will never forget that one line just rewiring my neurons as a kid, and the way it made me think about the implications of the foundational rules of a world that mainly existed in casual daydreams and playground games. I just remembered how lavaliers work. This idea that Pokemon are morally neutral also does something really interesting. It puts Meowth in a deeply contradictory position as a Pokemon who chooses violence constantly and knowingly. For this video, I've been focusing a lot more on Ash and his friends and not the Team Rocket B plots that are present in almost every single episode. Mainly because I realized there was so much to unpack with Team Rocket and Meowth, I needed to make a completely separate video about them, which is coming later. Go West Young Meowth is an episode that gives this cat and all of his contradictions a moment in the spotlight. We learn through his backstory reveal that Meowth didn't get here by coincidence. It wasn't external factors that put him at this one-of-a-kind intersection between human and Pokemon. It was Meowth and his determination to shape himself into the self he wanted to be. This deeply queer exploration of self was way more profound than I remembered. But I think the episode I underestimated the most in this rewatch was Ditto's mysterious mansion. The entire premise of Ditto is that their only move is to transform into other Pokemon, which is really fun in combat and delightfully queer when you combine it with Ditto's shape-shifting trainer. I mean, they call the mansion the House of Imite, there's a rainbow at the end, Ditto is queer-coded. This episode is a beautiful endorsement of the power of drag, of putting on a different self for a while and seeing what you learn about yourself in the process. But if we want to talk about learning things, we have to talk about Bye Bye Butterfree. Because episode 21 of this show taught a generation of kids what it means to love something and let it go. I really think it is that deep.
We have watched this Pokemon evolve from a little bug into a cocoon all the way into a butterfly. We have been shown, not told, how intertwined Butterfree is with Ash's journey. And we've seen Ash fight for that friendship. But after the events of this episode where Butterfree meets a flock of his own species and finds connection and even love, Ash and us, the audience, know that this is the time for Butterfree to start his own adventure on his own path. This was the easiest S rank I gave because this episode is truly about everything that came before with Butterfree and everything that Ash is going to do from here on out as someone who is strong enough to say goodbye to Butterfree. By now, it's come up a few times that I found most of the season finale arc pretty underwhelming, with one notable exception. Yeah, almost 20 episodes was a long time to spend with Butterfree before we said goodbye, but let's talk about Krabby for a moment. Ash catches Krabby in an absolute dud of a D rank episode, in a moment that's basically just a mechanics tutorial of the Pokemon storage system. Krabby doesn't really do anything besides little Discord call cameos until episode 75, over 60 episodes later. In Ash's... Crying over Pikachu is to be expected. Crying over Krabby is a little embarrassing. In Ash's very first battle in the Pokemon League, he doesn't choose Pikachu or Charizard, he chooses Krabby. I was floored at how exciting and moving this episode was, especially since that single battle is kind of the whole episode. Seeing this sidelined Pokemon get a chance to take center stage and whip ass beyond our wildest dreams is exactly what Pokemon is all about. And I don't know, something about the way Ash rushes across the water field to hug this enormous evolved Kingler just really makes you feel how overwhelming his joy is. When I was a kid, I didn't always like Ash as a character. I thought he was reckless and impulsive and made the objectively wrong decision literally all the time. But now, having grown up, I honestly feel really tender things for this reckless, impulsive boy from Pallet Town. I think his enthusiastic, borderline idiotic love is a beautiful thing to have at the heart of this show.
Now, to me, this very last episode is kind of the reason why I am doing any of this. It's why I knew this was a cosplay design that I could come back to and find fresh motivation even after months of time skips. And it's why I have watched all the other dozens of anime episodes. And it's also why I went up to my roof looking like this so that I could show you the finished skirt. In The Ghost of Maiden's Peak, our cast of characters finds themselves in a small town summer festival that seems to be haunted by the presence of a 2,000-year-old ghost. And at only episode 20, that makes this the very first exploration of the supernatural in the Pokemon world. The plot itself is kind of a delightful, hyper-concentrated potion of classic ghost story tropes. We learn at the very end, after an occult confrontation, that our ghost Pokemon culprit has been in league with the very real maidenly ghost, and our denouement sees us out with our heroes doing summer festival stuff. Now, I devoured scary stories and ghost stuff as a kid, but I knew somehow that this one was different, because this was the first ghost story that entered my orbit that carried a background radiation of a culture that wasn't my own, as evidenced by the summer festival that looked nothing like the cookouts and carnivals that I would associate with summer. When the mysterious old lady offers premium stickers to protect our heroes from ghosts, no one stops her to say, literally, what are you talking about? Because the stickers are, of course, just localized Ofuda, no explanation needed for Japanese characters and a Japanese audience. This episode taught me something exciting and contradictory, a kernel of a realization that could grow up with me as my perception of and access to the wider world grew, that ghost stories might very well be genuinely universal, while also being inseparable from the culture they're born out of. Both are true at the same time. And what an exciting realization to have in the 7:30 to 8 a.m. weekday morning time slot. Honestly, I started this rewatch just trying to see how good this show was or was not once I got the nostalgia goggles off. But I realized what I really need to ask is, why did this show ignite something in me that even merited nostalgia goggles? Because it's more than just being in the right place at the right time as an American kid in 1998. This series took the foundation of Satoshi Tajiri's personal nostalgia for the adventure of a summer's day, and it built on that an enticing sandbox for new generations of kids to go play in. The world building in the early anime is absolutely fearless and intentionally blue skyish. Like the Ghastly who was pretending to be the ghost of Maiden's Peak can fully talk, for no explicitly stated reason. When a franchise is over 2 decades old, it has to bear the weight of its own canon and contradictions, and decisions like that can carry complications. But in 1998, things were different. This early era wasn't setting things in stone, but instead giving us just enough to spark daydreams in the blank spaces. As scholar and close personal friend Justin Briner says, anime is an important part of our culture. And revisiting this anime has genuinely shown me
so much I've forgotten, so much I had remembered, and so much about how and why that Pokemon kid became the person I am today. The world that was created through the run of this anime still inspires me to create things. Only this time, instead of recess games, it's designing and sewing. It's the kind of labor and craft that I'm capable of now as an adult, in conversation with that kid and their joy. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. And if you enjoyed the ride, dropping a like or a share really helps this video get seen by more people. I know that there is an audience for this kind of hybrid video essay cosplay build log video, but it can be hard to find them on YouTube when you're making videos that don't fit neatly into a single category. And if you are that audience and you haven't subscribed yet, that is the best way to see more of this kind of stuff. I promise you are not going to want to miss the next couple of videos I have coming up in this series. My patrons already know all about that schedule of upcoming topics and crafting I'm going to cover in the Lavender Town Witch series, including stuff that you saw me wearing just now. Running my Patreon is actually my favorite part of what I do. It feels so special to host crafting live streams and share my sewing progress and get feedback from my patrons about where the channel is going next. I appreciate each and every one of you more than I could ever put into words, and I especially want to say thanks to Adrian Liebrecht, Thomas Drury Wang, Phantom Angel 1245, Simrel, Lulu Rush Cosplay, Adoilable, Joe Burrito, Turson, Tanya Shiba, Maggie Holden, Larzard, Arden Winner, Toria, Stephanie C, K-Fry84, Hust, and Eli. Thank you for being part of this channel. And please don't leave just yet, because this last part is really important. Spending the last several months through the fall, winter, and now spring, working on a project that's so focused on childhood memories and nostalgia, the children of Gaza have been on my mind every day. They deserve to be able to grow up and have memories and nostalgia of their own. But more children were killed in the first 4 months of Israel's assault, also funded by the United States, than were killed in the last 4 years of all global conflicts put together. I know that's a heavy place to end the video, but we're living in heavy times right now. And if you're like me and a citizen of the country that has been supporting this apartheid state for decades via foreign policy that is still currently actively funding this genocide, I hope you join me in doing what you can to stand up against that, in whatever way you are capable of, because I am with you on that 100% every step of the way. And hey, you know, I'll catch you in the next one. Stay weird and stay hydrated. I think that's what I said last time, and I'm standing by it. It's my story and I'm sticking to it.